Welcome to the Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines, your host and podcast producer. This is a half hour of power, a podcast dropping every week where I unpack the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment, equality, and much, much more. Our guests are seasoned in the field or topic of their choice, even if you've not heard of them yet. This is a non-partisan show. So while I love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate of ideas, this is not a purely blue, white, green program. Please subscribe, tune in and enjoy the politics of everything. If I asked you about ways to tackle climate change, to create real action, would you think of art and creativity? I suggest not initially, at least. Meet Deborah Hart, a climate environment focused creative producer and writer based in Narrm, otherwise known as Melbourne. After 16 years working in development roles with leading Australian arts and culture organisations, as increasingly neoliberal government policies were forcing important public organisations to form ever closer alliances with harmful industries, Deborah left her profession in order to devote more time to climate activism. Then she went on and founded LIVE, which stands for Locals into Victoria's Environment in 2006, and later co-founded CLIMARTE in 2010 and ClimActs 2013 to harness the power of the creative arts and performative action to highlight the causes and urgency of the climate emergency, as well as the readily available and socially and ecologically sustainable solution. She's also an author of Guarding Eden, Champions of Climate Action, which she published in 2015, which tells inspiring personal stories showing how and why highly destructive polluting industries that built immense wealth and influence last century are now using that power recklessly to maintain business as usual, as in protecting their profits, and the inspiring actions ordinary citizens are taking to safeguard nature and humanity's future. For her role in sustaining a vibrant creative community in 2023, Deborah was honoured with the City of Yarra's Contribution to the Arts Award, and I warmly welcome her to the Politics of Everything.
Thank you so much, Amber. It's really great to be speaking with you and, having an opportunity to discuss some very important topics at the moment.
Podcasting remotely can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be. Since day one of the Politics of Everything, I have relied on Zencastr's all-in-one solution to make the process quick and painless, the way it should be for those of us who just love great content and want to get our ideas out into the world. If you know me, I'm obsessed with quality in terms of my guests, my sound, and everything about my show has to be great the first time. I'm time poor. It's so easy to use Zencastr. I'm not tech savvy and you don't need to be either. There's nothing to download. Just click on the link and off we go. Zencastr is all about making your podcasting experience easy, and with everything from local recording to automatic post-productions now in their toolkit, you don't have to leave your browser to get that episode done, and done fast. I have a special offer for you, and hopefully you can experience what I have with Zencastr. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my VIP code, the Politics of Everything, all lowercase in one word, to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. How good is that? I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. Absolutely. It's a big one, but I will start by asking you a question I ask all my guests. What did you think you wanted to do when you were younger? Did you have a plan when you were maybe a teen or an early 20s adult? Did you go to uni? What was your career backstory?
It's really funny thinking back on that, because really I was more focused on what seemed to need doing and changing in the world. I was one of those young people who I was profoundly concerned by inequality and within and between nations. And from a very early age, we moved a lot. That's another story. But it was very evident to me that the world worked in ways that weren't really very democratic. And I lived in democratic countries, but they didn't seem, people obviously were not equal, didn't have equal opportunities. And
yes.
And I was disturbed by that, but I didn't quite know what role I would play in working with other people to change that. So I do look back and I had no idea what I could be, because I wasn't quite sure what a role like community organizer was back then.
It's amazing. You obviously had that social awareness in you from, from a young age. A lot of people don't necessarily think about others when they're thinking, like, when you're a kid, you think, oh, I'll be, it might be an artist or a dancer or an astronaut. You're not necessarily thinking about, I guess, the bigger picture, but obviously that's sort of been in the stars for you as well. When did you first become engaged or interested in this idea of climate action in your adult life? Do you remember a specific period of your life or a moment when you realized that you needed or wanted to make it something that you fought for and was a priority in what you did?
Yes, there was this one complete moment. So I was working at the National Gallery of Victoria. I had a wonderful job. I absolutely loved working in the arts, and I had been working in the arts for about 16 years by then, and I was always sort of signing petitions and things. I was aware of Greenpeace, and I did some volunteering presenting and things. And then basically the Hazelwood power plant came up for, basically it was set to have been closed by 2005, but instead it was extended by another 35 years. And this was a plant that I knew very well because my father, who had been, he'd been orphaned, and he was able to get a scholarship to go to university through the State Electricity Commission, and he was on the design team for the Hazelwood Boilermaker. So I grew up understanding that this was an extremely dirty power plant that had, paid its costs, many times over, and should have been shut. And the fact that the neoliberal economic policies that had really come in the kind of early 80s and sought to basically extract every single, ounce of material financial wealth, ignoring all of the other costs, was severely influencing policy. So in 2005, basically the Victorian government, instead of closing it, they basically, gave this terrible plant an extension of 35 years. And there were some Greens saying, hang on, there's this thing called global warming, and this is a really dirty power plant, and it shouldn't be open, and it shouldn't be in the hands of a private company that is not going to maintain it properly and not going to look after its workers. But it basically sailed through Parliament. And when I learned of that, I thought, oh my God, our politicians, they just must not know. They just must not know what's going on. They must not know the science. And how do I get engaged with that? But also because I was very aware that as much as I loved my job and I loved working in the arts, increasingly the arts, like other important public institutions and our universities, were basically becoming kind of arms of industry. And when I say that, I mean literally marketing arms of industries that were seeking to further embed themselves in public life. And we were kind of art washing. So as much as I thought I was...
Oh, I haven't heard of that term before. I've heard greenwashing and I've heard of lots of other washing, but that's interesting, isn't it? Even in an industry where you think... I think with the creative arts, and I had a career in the creative arts as well as a curator for a period of my life, and I remember thinking this is where activism and stuff happens. But like you say, everyone can be part of that problem, if you like, rather than just the solution.
And Amber, that's probably why the arts are targeted too, because if you're wanting to silence any sort of criticism, and these leading public institutions, they're really important crucibles in our society. This is where we, as you say, this is where we ask important questions and interrogate ideas and put forward alternatives. So when you force the arts to become reliant on the very industries that they really should exist to critique, that's a very effective strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And how have you used or elevated, I guess, the arts and creativity in various forms to raise awareness of the issues? I guess this is a how question rather than a why question, so that, things like, obviously when you started your first organisation, some sort of 14 years ago, then you sort of evolved into something else. Like, what's been that process, I guess, to actually make sure that you're relevant but also being heard?
I guess probably for similar reasons that you were drawn to the arts. Art is our most powerful universal language, and it is such a great way of getting under people's guards and helping people see things with new perspectives and, new ideas, and it can really shift things. And I see the climate crisis as a reflection of a deep cultural crisis, and that the arts is arguably the best way to shift cultural boundaries. Artists are particularly good at it. This is one of the reasons why, when authoritarians get hold of the reins, you see artists and academics and, philosophers, thinkers are the first targeted to be silenced or worse. So the arts are very powerful, and in ways that punch way above their weight. And yet they're among the most disadvantaged in our economy.
I was going to say,
question.
That's an interesting. So how does that intersect? I guess where there's a financial need in the arts, and I worked in the marketing and philanthropy side of the arts as well for a period of time, and obviously we all know that this term struggling artist isn't a euphemism for no reason. It's because it's true. And arts are always looking for support, and sometimes that support comes in corporate money, which might then be aligned with some of these big polluters, for example. How do you navigate that?
That's right, and to recognise that is a very good. It's a strategy. It's not by accident. So,
because you need to have support, right? You need financial support to get the art happening.
And these are really bigger economic questions. And I studied economics too. I was really interested in I did go to university and I studied arts and politics and economics because I was very interested in what our society's priorities were. And again, as I said, having grown up in the kind of mid 60s I left school in 1982. So went straight into university, and then suddenly it was literally like a boot came down on our heads. So the ways in which we, early Gen Xers, I guess, were brought up to value things and to value justice and fairness and to participate in the world was really, really interrupted with this idea that it's all about material wealth. And it sounds like I've kind of diverted, but in the arts, as we know, it's very difficult. I mean, unless you're looking at high-end collecting, and I had a lot of experience dealing with people who got involved in leading institutions because they wanted also inside knowledge and access about collecting. So unless you're at that kind of really materialistic collecting end, and are very fortunate to be there, the life of most artists is extremely insecure, and COVID really exposed so many of the flaws that had built up over many, many decades. But it not only exposed that, but it also then kind of put it all on steroids. So Creative Australia has just come out with a recent report that shows the precariousness of the industry. And it's a complete...
I did see that report, yes. Yeah. That did get my attention. So that's interesting. We have metrics around that.
Totally. And we all value the arts. I mean, as a contribution to society, the arts are so invaluable. And yet the working conditions of artists in modern Australia are appalling. So
yeah, they're probably getting worse because I was in the arts probably about 16 years ago, and it was always tough, but there was probably different things we're paying attention to, but it doesn't feel like we ever moved the needle on that.
That's right. Well, if anything, I feel like the people who are profoundly kind of hostile, or really fundamentally hostile to democracy and to the arts and the sorts of questions that are raised by artists have pretty much captured, decision making and captured public debate, and our media concentration of ownership. They're people who really actually don't like artists, I think I can quite safely say.
Yeah. That would make sense. I mean, it's challenging for people to have the status quo, I guess, pushed in front of them and then have to support that as well. How do you describe the role of politics and, of course, business interests, which we've touched on, in delaying some of those big decisions which we need for faster climate action? It's not like we didn't know 20, 30, 40 years ago this was going to be an issue, but now here we are, and it feels like it's a glacial pace things that moving forward at. So what would you think would need to happen in terms of that will, that political will, but also laying down the law when it comes to business interests and making sure that we basically change the trajectory of tackling climate action?
Okay, so we are in this terrifying place that we're in right now entirely because of interference from industry at every level. So it's very frustrating to hear these conversations spoken about as though we don't know the people who had the power, the awareness of the science, and the responsibility to avoid the climate emergency. And they had all of this in the late 60s and early 70s. A lot of the alternative zero emission alternatives were in development because of the OPEC oil crisis. And there were concerns being raised. Again, this is where there was this reaction to feminism, to environmentalism, to like, oh, hang on a minute, we actually live on this planet with other beings, and you know what, we kind of rely on them for everything. So there was this real reaction to those sort of progressive movements. And so these people who had that power and responsibility, they knew exactly what they were doing. So they set about creating these mass disinformation campaigns, suppressing the solutions, really silencing the science, destroying the careers of scientists who were raising the alarm. And they're still flying around in, private jets, and I'm waiting.
I was going to say, I'm sure life for them doesn't change because they've got the, I guess, financial means for it not to.
Except you just wonder when that tipping point will be. And that's what happens through history. So when enough of us say, this is just so outrageous and you're going to be held to account, because it's not just that we need the money for the transition, which we do because it's decades overdue, and
we're playing catch up big time for sure.
Right. And if they could have found ways to own and control access to renewable technologies, which are far more democratically, created and structured and capable of being owned in collective community models, so everybody benefits. If they could have worked that out, then we would, that the transition would have happened. They just basically have sought to continue to own and control access to energy, which powers everything, of course, so that they could just maximize profits. And this is where the nuclear debate comes in. I mean, that's just complete nonsense. I'm not, I could go on for hours about that. But
I know, but it does feel like it's almost like fast rail between, capital cities in Australia. This comes up every election cycle, it feels like, and it's just a bit of a noise and a bit of a distraction, but it doesn't necessarily change big picture what's happening. Well, you know what I mean? We got myopic on one type of form, whether you agree with nuclear or not, and then the whole thing becomes too hard, and then it's BAU.
Well, nuclear is a very good distraction, but also, one, because it kicks the can down the road, but also because it can be owned and controlled to maximize profits. So that's where, but of course, it's like, it'll be I think it's like 35 years before a nuclear power plant would even pay off the carbon embedded in creating it.
Exactly.
It's just on every level, it is such rubbish. And if we had politicians who weren't, and can I say, when, going back to your question, the Atlas network of affiliated think tanks, they're roughly kind of, I think, 550 to 600 affiliated think tanks around the world. Australia hosts a number of the most powerful ones. They were hugely active during the referendum because any capacities for Indigenous people to have a greater say on what goes on in their land is a threat to the mining industry, so a perceived threat to them. So they were, hugely active financing disinformation campaigns, and really, really, it was an assault. And they're so good at it. And so if we were to look to where this is really coming from, I can say it's not just industry, it's the Atlas network of affiliated think tanks that are entirely funded by industry. So we do know, I mean, it's taken a while, it always does, but we do understand this ecosystem better, how they go about it, how they go about shaping the public debate, even though people's personal values they're not aligned. It's like what we were just, saying earlier about artists. Most people think artists are pretty great. So why do we want to starve them and live, have them living in such insecurity?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
really
exactly.
interesting. If you are interested in the way, life works for most people, it all meets in climate, because it's about justice, and it's about, I could have been an activist in so many different things, but I thought, well, at the end of the day, they all actually all meet at climate. So I could fight, for forests, I could fight for whales, I could fight for people, but at the end of the day, if we're all going to be smashed because the climate's breaking down, focus on the climate.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. And I think you brought that together in a way which makes sense as well. Are there certain ways or particular, one or two maybe, that ways that you believe that creative thinkers and makers become more engaged with climate action in a practical way, meaning that we don't just get inspired or, sometimes it shocks you art, sometimes it makes you move you to tears. There's obviously an emotional response, but actually sometimes that's, you walk away from it and it can feel idealistic. It feels like that's shocking and terrible, but nothing really is going to change. But are there ways in which you think the creative forces can actually move the needle on this in a positive way?
Oh, I so do. So artists are complex systems thinkers, and their whole world that they work in is around experimenting and, addressing new challenges. And we need seriously imaginative and visionary approaches. So it's, artists can make very powerful work that engages and inspires and really does shine spotlights on, holds power to account. But I think artists are also, they should be sitting at the table and helping to draft the climate emergency plans. And they'll probably be more fun with you if you've got some
I was going to
artists
say, it sounds way
involved.
better than just a bunch of words on a page and another white paper,
Yeah,
perhaps.
that's right. At the end of the day, how do we feel about what's going on, and how do we engage with those really deep emotions? Because to get humans to really take action on anything requires that kind of very deep emotional connections and solutions. So ClimArte doesn't just focus on, this is the problem. We focus very much on the solutions have been there since the 60s and 70s. We should have
Yeah.
done this by the early 90s, and we would have had industry not found ways to interfere in very, very covert, secretive ways. And these Atlas Network think tanks I was talking about, they all get tax deductions. So
Yeah.
they get
Absolutely.
basically,
It's a big beast there behind all the mechanics of what we see.
yeah,
There's definitely money and power
and they're
in different
registered
corridors.
charities. It's just outrageous. And
It
if
is.
more people understood that, I think we'd
Yeah.
see some pretty radical change pretty quickly. Yeah. So thanks for having me on your podcast.
It's awesome. I love this discussion. There's a lot in it, almost too much for one show, but it's definitely giving us all food for thought. To change tack a little bit, what's a business tool or a hack or some sort of piece of tech maybe that you're using in your business or your life that you're really enjoying and getting value from?
There's a Millernote. Have you heard of Millernote? It's basically like a virtual whiteboard. It's
Oh,
fantastic.
right.
So it's a really great creative organizing tool. So have a look at that. You can kind of, you can upload images and links to things, and it's
That's great. I haven't heard of that. I've got a Remarkable, those that you basically make notes on and it turns it into notes that can go into your laptop. It also is great for imagery if you're a creative thinker and you like to doodle or you like to draw graphs and represent things like that. It's been great. And it's just like writing on paper, which is what I love, because that's going to age me by saying that. But I definitely love
I'm with you.
my notebook and pen. But although technology can help, I do love a bit of tech as well if it saves me time, because we're all pretty time
Exactly.
poor these days.
Yeah, we got to go
Also,
with it, don't we, Amber?
you do have to find the bits you like and then say no thanks to the bits that maybe are not for you. What's been your biggest life lesson to date and why has it been important?
Really understanding what you can control, and that really the only thing is how you respond to situations. You know, there's so many situations. It's just one of those lessons I keep relearning on a daily basis, I think. But, you know, it's like the one thing that we really can control is our responses. So, and to really focus on making sure that they are the best responses that we are capable of, with the you know, taking into consideration the best available facts and data and evidence. How do I respond? And this is why I cannot understand why we have politicians who are not responding to the facts in that way. That's their job.
Exactly. That's what we elect them to do, to make those responsible decisions on our behalf. How do you define your own version of success?
When people like me don't need to basically fight for common sense to be heard, fight to have our scientists who have worked so hard to do the brilliant work that they have done to show us what's at stake, the gravity of what's at stake, aren't continuously being ignored and worse. Yeah, so that will be, you know, when I don't have to do this anymore, it'll be, you know, and we have a genuine climate justice process, and we have those people who are responsible held to account, and we've got to take away their money because they just keep interfering. So it's not just the money we need for the transition, it really is actually ending their capacities to continue their interference.
Absolutely. A final takeaway message for us on the politics of climate action.
Well, and that was the purpose of my book, was to show that we can all make a difference in our lives, and that whatever shape that takes, and we're all part of communities, and to we don't have to educate ourselves in all the, you know, nuances of climate change. It's enough to know what a responsible democracy looks like, and that if we hold our leaders to account for just responding to the best available facts and data, evidence and independent evidence, not vested interests, not political donors, that we do all have a role in society, and that we should, you know, that old expression you remember, and this came along with neoliberalism, is, oh, that's so political. You're like, well, that's actually, like, what's wrong with that? Because doesn't that mean that I care about the way others experience the world and our society? Be proud of being political. We are unashamedly political at ClimArte and ClimActs and Live. We literally say we are unashamedly political. We encourage people to speak up on what's right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. If you do want to connect further with Deborah and her organisations, you can through our show notes. There will be some links there. It's been an absolute pleasure. Until next time, take care. Thanks so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed the politics of everything, I thrive on your feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network through Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects. I'm always on the hunt for new and diverse guests, so if you or someone you know has a fresh idea you're busting to get out there, please email me at amber@amberdanes.com, and my crew will get back to you very soon.